December 28th, 2014, from TCF Bank Stadium in Minneapolis, Minnesota, was the Chicago Bears at the Minnesota Vikings in this division rivalry game in the final week of the season. So the Bears get the ball first. They started off with it on their own 20, but after 6 plays, they would end up punting from the 34. So now Minnesota would take over on their own 20 after the punt with 10.5 minutes still left in the first. And they would get into Chicago territory and all the way down to the edge of the red zone, but they would end up having to settle for a field goal as Blair Walsh would come out to attempt a 37-yarder. It was up, it was good, and the Vikings put the first points on the scoreboard with the score now Minnesota 3, Chicago 0. So now after the kickoff, the Bears would take over on their own 14 with about 5 minutes left in the first. And they would bring the ball out to midfield on this possession, but after 9 plays, they would end up punting from their own 50. And that would actually bring the first quarter to a close. So after 1 quarter of play, the score was Minnesota 3, Chicago 0. Now to open up the second quarter, the Vikings had the ball on their own 8-yard line after the punt, and they would end up punting from their own 15 after 6 plays. They did get a first down, but then they ended up moving backwards. They actually lost some yards on an end around. But either way, they would end up punting from the 15, and now the Bears would take over near midfield on their own 44 with about 11.5 left in the second quarter. They would get into Minnesota territory, but then penalties would bring them back. First, a false start penalty, and then on 1st and 15 from the Minnesota 36, Cutler was sacked by Joseph and Hodges, and that would bring them back to the 40, and they weren't able to get a first down, so they would end up punting from the Minnesota 38. Instead of attempting a long field goal, it would have been a 55-yarder, but they elected to punt the ball. And so now the Vikings would take over on their own 20 after the punt with a little over 5 minutes still left in the first half. They went 3 and out on the possession and ended up punting from their own 29. So now the Bears would take over on their own 28 with about 4 minutes left before halftime. They were faced with a 2nd and 9 from the 29. Cutler hit Martellus Bennett for a 15-yard reception, a first down at the Chicago 44. Then on 3rd and 8 from the 46, Cutler hit Alshon Jeffrey for a 19-yard reception and a first down in Minnesota territory at the 35. The drive would stall on the 30, though, and out would come the field goal unit as Jay Feely would attempt a 48-yard field goal. It was up and it was good, and this game was tied at 3 apiece. So now with a minute left before halftime, the Vikings would get the ball after the kickoff on their own 32. They would get the ball up to midfield at the 50, but then Bridgewater was sacked by Ratliff, and that would bring them back to the 42 for 2nd and 18. And an 11-yard pass would not get a first down, but it would bring the first half to a close. So after 2 quarters of play, the score was Chicago 3, Minnesota 3. So now to begin the second half, Minnesota would get the ball first. They had on their own 35 after the kickoff, and on 2nd and 10 from the 35, Teddy Bridgewater was intercepted by Kyle Fuller, and he ran it back 40 yards for the touchdown and the pick 6. But then they ended up challenging the play and ended up being ruled a 31-yard return. So now the Bears would take over with 1st and goal on the 9-yard line after the interception, with just 15 seconds ticked off the clock in the 3rd. They weren't able to get into the end zone, and out would come Feely to attempt a 25-yard field goal. It was up, it was good, and the Bears took the lead with the score Chicago 6, Minnesota 3. So now the Vikings would get the ball for the second time in the second half. They had it on their own 20 after the kickoff. They were faced with a 2nd and 4 from the 26. Asiata picked up 7 yards in the first down at the 33. Then on 3rd and 9 from the 34, Teddy Bridgewater out of the shotgun hit Thielen for a 22-yard pass that made a first down in Chicago territory at the 44. Then out of the no huddle in the shotgun, Teddy Bridgewater went back to Thielen for a 44-yard touchdown. And Minnesota was now in the lead with the score, Minnesota 10, Chicago 6. So now the Bears got the ball after the kickoff with still 11 minutes left in the 3rd quarter. They had on their own 18 after the kickoff. They would end up getting the ball into Minnesota territory. Their drive stalled though on the 25, and out would come Feely to attempt a 43-yard field goal. It was up and it was no good. So the score remained Minnesota 10, Chicago 6. Now after the missed field goal, the Vikings would take over on their own 33 with 6 minutes left in the third. They would end up getting the ball into Chicago territory, but after 8 plays, they would end up punting from the Chicago 40. So now the Bears would take over on their own 12 with about a minute and a half left in the third after the punt. They then faced Cutler ended up being sacked actually by Wooten for a 3-yard loss, and then he picked up 15 yards on a scramble to pick up the first down as the third quarter came to a close. So after 3 quarters of play, the score was Minnesota 10, Chicago 6. Now to open up the fourth quarter, it was 1st and 10 from the Chicago 24 for the Bears, but they would end up punting a few plays later from the 28. So now the Vikings would take over after the punt with 14 minutes still left in regulation, up by 4. The ball on their own 48. And on first down, Bridgewater went to Jennings, but he lost 15 yards on the pass, a little short receiver screen. But then now 2nd and 25 from the 33. Bridgewater then scrambled, and he was able to then pass to Bridgewater for a 20-yard reception. And now it was a 1st and 10 on the 33. So a run by Bridgewater and then the pass, and now they would end up stalling, though, at the 26, and out would come Blair Walsh to attempt a 44-yard field goal. It was up, it was good, and the Vikings extended their lead to 7 with the score Minnesota 13, Chicago 6. So now the Bears would have the ball on the Minnesota 35 after a 67-yard return on the kickoff by Mariani. And on first down, Jay Cutler dropped back. He was intercepted by Cole, but offsides against the defense would wipe the interception off the board, and it would be 1st and 5 for the Bears on the Minnesota 30. Then on 4th and 3 from the 28, instead of kicking the field goal, they elected to go for it, and Cutler went to the tight end, Martellus Bennett. He picked up 15 yards in the first down. It made a first down in the red zone at the 13-yard line. But they weren't able to get another first down. Actually, penalties moved them back. And so out would come Feely to attempt a 35-yard field goal. It was up, it was good, and it was now a 4-point game with the score Minnesota 13, Chicago 9. So now the Vikings would get the ball after the kickoff on their own 32 with less than 9 minutes left in the fourth. They're faced with a 3rd and 12 from the 30, and Bridgewater hit Jennings for a 19-yard reception, a first down at midfield at the Minnesota 49. Then on 3rd and 1 from the 42, Asiata picked up 16 yards on the ground, a first down to 26. Then on 3rd and 4 from the 20, Bridgewater scrambled for 8 yards and a first down in the red zone at the 12. But they weren't able to get another first down. They were faced with a 3rd and 1 on the 3, and Asiata got stopped for no gain. And so now on 4th and 1 from the 3, instead of kicking the field goal, the Vikings elected to go for it. They gave it to Asiata, and he was stuffed again for no gain. So now the Vikings turned the ball over on downs, and the Bears would have the ball on their own 3-yard line, trailing by 4 points with less than 3 minutes left to play in the fourth quarter. And on first down, Cutler scrambled for 22 yards, and the first down at the 25. But then a penalty with a false start would move him backwards, and then another penalty against the offense, illegal touch pass, would bring him back even further. And so now they would be faced with a 2nd and 20. Cutler then went to Forte. He picked up 6 yards to make it 3rd and 14, but then another false start would push him back again, and now it was 3rd and 19. Cutler went to Forte, picked up 10 yards, but that wasn't enough for the first down, so now it's 4th and 9 from the 26. They would elect to go for it as they had no other choice. And Cutler went to the tight end, Martellus Bennett, and he picked up 8 yards. He was just shy of the first down, 1 yard shy. And so the Bears turned the ball over on downs. And now Minnesota would take over on the Chicago 33, and all that was left to do was for Teddy Bridgewater to take 3 knees as the Minnesota Vikings win this game with the final score Minnesota 13, Chicago 9. And with the victory, the Vikings are now 7-9 on the season. That's their final record. They're 5-3 at home, so they have a winning record in Minnesota, in the University of Minnesota's stadium there, as they're still waiting for their stadium to be completed. The Bears are 5-11 on the season, 3-5 on the road. They actually have a better road record than a home record, as they're 2-6 at home for Chicago. But in this game, Teddy Bridgewater was 17 for 25. He had 209 passing yards, 1 touchdown, and an interception. He also had 6 carries for 18 yards. Jay Cutler was 23 for 36 with 172 passing yards. He had 39 rushing yards off of 3 carries. The leading rusher in this game was Matt Asiata. He had 19 carries for 91 yards. He also had 2 receptions for 17 yards. The leading rusher for Chicago was Matt Forte. He had 17 carries for 51 yards. He also had 23 yards receiving off of 8 receptions. The leading receiver in this game was for Minnesota, Adam Thielen. Had 3 receptions for 68 yards, including a touchdown. Greg Jennings had 3 receptions for 45 yards. And the leading receiver for Chicago was their tight end Martellus Bennett, who had 8 receptions for 59 yards. And Alshon Jeffrey had 2 receptions for 34 yards. And the leading tackler in this game was for the Vikings. Audie Cole had 14 tackles in this game. Hodges had 11 tackles. The leading tackler for Chicago was Ryan Mundy. He had 11 tackles as well. Bostic had 10. The Bears had 3 sacks in this game. Jones, Ratliff, and Bass each had a sack. And the Vikings had 2 sacks. Wooten had a sack, and Joseph and Hodges combined for a half a sack. And the lone interception in this game was from Kyle Fuller, the rookie for Chicago, had that pick. But in the end, the Vikings hold on to win in a defensive battle with a final score, Minnesota 13, Chicago 9.